Hello and welcome to our presentation, Substance Use Prevention and Encouraging Healthy Brain Development. This presentation is a condensed version of our three-part parent series. Our presenters today are Substance Abuse Prevention Specialists, Carrie Glasgow, Elizabeth Knutson, and Beth Mohop. In the first section of the presentation, Carrie will provide information about the teenage brain and its functions. In the second part, Elizabeth will address how drugs impact the teenage brain. And at the third part, Beth will talk about current teen drug trends. This information today is brought to you by the Substance Abuse Prevention Program with the Office of Student Safety and Wellness.
Stressful, overwhelming, frustrating, challenging, but also exciting, fun, inspiring, and rewarding. I want to take a minute and point out that the words that we use to describe parenting a teenager are also the very same words that our teens use when asked to describe what it feels like to be a teenager. This is an important point to remember as you struggle to find common ground with your teen or a starting off point for conversations. There is a common theme running between parents and teens, and it's that the emotions that we're feeling about this stage in our lives are exactly the same. That's a pretty powerful thought, and one that's important for both us as parents and for our adolescents to remember. An important point to remember about brain development is that the brain develops from the back to the front, and also from the innermost parts to the outermost parts. Adolescence is a sensitive period in brain development, which means that it's a really special and unique window of opportunity. This is wonderful because it means that the brain is maturing, and sensitive periods offer really specialized opportunities to grow and thrive. However, it also can create some vulnerabilities that are unique to this period of time in development. And our hope is that the following information will provide you with some additional information about those vulnerabilities during this time of brain development, but also the magnificent opportunities that it provides. There is a lot happening within the adolescent brain, but I want to start with two really important things that occur during this time. The first one is that brain cells are creating stronger and faster connections in order to communicate more effectively with one another. This is important because it helps to integrate the brain, simply meaning it helps to move information faster from one part of the brain to the other. A really good way to explain what is happening is to think of it in terms of the internet. If you remember that old, screechy, unreliable dial-up internet with its hit or miss connections and its slow speeds, and then compare that to the almost instantaneous internet connections we have today. What is occurring in the adolescent brain is like upgrading from dial-up internet to the Fios internet of today. The second thing that's happening is the optimization of connectivity and better efficiency. So the adolescent brain is full of all of the information that they've been gathering up until this point in their lives. And the brain starts to filter through and decide what information is utilized on a regular basis and what information isn't utilized regularly. The connections for information that isn't used are pruned back or cut back in order to focus on the connections for the information that it needs and it uses often. Now, this may seem counterintuitive to think that the brain would get rid of some of its connections, but it actually increases efficiency. It makes the connections that it keeps more robust and stronger. Think of it in terms of cleaning out your closet. For instance, if you walk into your closet and you're looking for a piece of clothing, but you have all these clothes in there, the ones that don't fit, the ones that do, the ones you don't like, the ones you do, and because there are so many items, it's difficult to find what you're looking for. However, when you clean out the closet, you get rid of all of those old clothes that you don't wear or you don't need, it becomes easier to find what you're looking for because it's just less cluttered and it's more organized. During adolescence, the brain is literally cleaning up the closet in order to optimize efficiency and access to information. So in short, the teen brain is building stronger and faster connections, and it's becoming more efficient at moving information across those connections. So these are the main parts of the brain that we'll be discussing during today's presentation. We'll also be discussing the limbic system, which is located deep within the brain. Now, remember that the brain develops from the back to the front, but it also develops from the inside to the outside, meaning that the hindbrain and the midbrain are well developed by adolescence, but the forebrain, or the frontal lobe, remains under construction. So the hindbrain controls all of our autopilot activities, the things that we have to do every day to survive that we don't even think about: our heartbeat, our breathing, our digestion. And this is well developed when we're born, because those are things that a baby needs to be able to do in order to survive. A baby doesn't need to know how to complete a complex math problem or think abstractly. So those are things that develop later. During adolescence, the limbic system is well developed also. And the parts we're going to focus on today are the midbrain, or the limbic system, and the frontal lobe. The parts that are well developed being the midbrain, or the limbic system, and the part that's still developing being the frontal lobe, or the forebrain. And hopefully this will help to shed some light on the oftentimes frustrating behaviors that we sometimes struggle to understand when it comes to adolescence. So the middle part of the brain, or the limbic system, is very well developed in teens, and they rely on it pretty heavily. In fact, this part of the brain is what fuels most of adolescent behavior, because the frontal lobe is still developing. In adults, the frontal lobe is well developed, and it provides this system of checks and balances to the highly reactive and emotion-driven limbic system. Since the frontal lobe in adolescence is less well developed, they tend to think with their emotional mind. And the limbic system is really important. It's a fast-paced processor of information, but it can be a very reactive part of the brain. However, it does serve some really important purposes. In fact, the limbic system can loosely be explained as the crossroads of the brain where emotions and experiences come together and get integrated. So let's take a deeper look at what the limbic system is responsible for. One part of the limbic system is the hippocampus. This part of the brain is the base for learning, and it is supercharged during adolescence. This is why it's so easy for adolescents to learn new information. For instance, if you have ever watched how quickly your teen adapts to changes in programs in computers or apps on their phone, it takes them no time at all to adapt. Whereas when Gmail changes its format, I am paralyzed. This is a time period like no other in terms of one's ability to learn new information. This part of the brain is also responsible for creating new memories, storing memories, and retrieving them. And additionally, this part of the brain is greatly affected in adolescence by drug use, as opposed to the adult brain, which when fully developed, has a few more protections in place. Our limbic system is sometimes referred to as our lizard brain, and that's because it's highly reactive. It makes split-second decisions in order to keep us safe. This is your fight or flight survival instinct brain. It evaluates your surroundings, looking for danger, and when it sees danger, it makes a decision about what to do next. Because the frontal lobe is still developing, teenagers rely on this part of their brain, their lizard brain, to make decisions and solve problems more than adults do. But this part of the brain is highly emotional and is meant for split-second decision makings. So oftentimes, teens overreact to a perceived threat or react impulsively without stopping to think things through. It can sometimes trip them up. This part of the brain is also known as the amygdala, and it's responsible for emotions, impulses, aggression, and instinctive behavior. And this helps to explain why adolescents tend to be more emotion-driven and make decisions based on quick emotional responses and impulses, as opposed to adults who are just better able to utilize more complex reasoning and deliberation before taking action. A good comparison is the adolescent brain is like getting your news from TMZ versus the adult brain, which is able to integrate the emotional mind and the wise mind, so it's more akin to listening to NPR. Sometimes I like to refer to the frontal lobe as our wizard brain in comparison to our lizard brain. Our wizard brain is really good at thinking about consequences and problem solving. It's our wise mind. Our lizard brain reacts quickly and emotionally without really weighing a lot of consequences. It's our emotional mind. Remember how I said that the brain develops from back to front? With that in mind, the frontal lobe is the last part of the brain to develop. It's essentially under construction in adolescence, and it isn't fully developed and matured until the early 20s. And when I say under construction, I don't mean that adolescents don't have a frontal lobe. It just isn't fully matured. So think of it in terms of I-66. For the most part, it's accessible while under construction. You can use it and get to your destination, but it isn't always efficient, and traffic just moves a little more slowly and deliberately at times. However, unlike I-66, the teenage brain actually does stop construction at some point. So with that in mind, let's look at what functions of the adolescent brain are undergoing construction in the frontal lobe. Assessing future consequences of actions, organization, planning, attention, concentration, motivation, reasoning, judgment, problem solving, emotional regulation, and the ability to read the emotions of others, and impulse control. These types of thinking are being built during adolescence. They aren't something that just show up and are automatically working at optimal speeds. They take time to grow. And the frontal lobe and these parts, as I said, they are functional, but they don't function as well, and they aren't as efficient at disseminating and evaluating information, at least not in the same way that our adult brain does. Which brings us back to the part of the brain that is fully functional and tends to rule adolescent behavior, the quick to react and emotional mind. It's truly not your teen's fault that they tend to make decisions without waiting for all the information or without clearly thinking about all of the consequences in the way that we would. Their brain is wired differently, and their thought processes, though sometimes hard for us to understand as parents, are actually quite developmentally normal and appropriate. So how can I utilize all of this information when it comes to parenting? First, teach your kids about their brain, how it works for them, and how it works against them. Talk through problems and decision making. Ask about possible courses of action that your child might choose and talk about potential consequences. The part of the brain responsible for future thinking is still developing. If you talk to your child about how their actions influence both the present and the future, you can help the healthy development of your adolescent's brain and encourage your adolescent to be able to think through and weigh their actions. Remember, we can't, as parents, expect 40-year-old decision making from a 15-year-old brain. We have had a lifetime of experience and have a fully developed brain. This type of thinking is not a shiny new toy to us, but it is to them. And it's important to teach our children how we work through problems in order to encourage healthy brain development. Secondly, talk about the difficult topics. Don't hide from them. I can't emphasize the importance of this one enough. The fact of the matter is that if you don't talk to your kids about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they're going to get the information from somewhere else, and it might not be accurate, or the information that you feel is important for them to know. The earlier you begin to talk about the tough subjects, the better, as it keeps the lines of communication open. Make jokes, use humor. Even if they're bad jokes, they diffuse uncomfortable subjects. Don't think of topics in terms of if my child uses drugs or alcohol, or if my child has sex. Think of it in terms of when. This encourages us to utilize preventative parenting, meaning we address problems before they start versus reactive parenting. I would much rather have a conversation with my teenage daughter about alcohol early in her teen years and early in her middle school years than waiting until she comes home intoxicated to have that same conversation. And remember to play out scenarios. We often talk to our kids about, for instance, don't accept a drink from a stranger at a party, but then we don't talk through the scenario. For instance, yes, you know that now that you shouldn't have a drink that's given to you by a stranger, but what happens when you're at the party and you've already had a few drinks yourself? Are you going to be thinking clearly enough not to accept the drink from the stranger then? Just because you talk about drugs or drinking or sex, it doesn't mean you're giving them permission to engage in these activities. It only means that you're opening up the lines of communication with your teen. It's important to discuss these things, and you can still set your expectations for their behavior. Explain the why behind the rules rather than just telling them not to do something. We all want to know why when we're given rules. It helps us understand the reasoning behind the rules. And though the reasoning may be really obvious to us as parents, it may not be quite so obvious to your teen. Again, remember, we can't expect 40-year-old decision making from a 15-year-old brain. Create a stress management plan with your child. We talk to our children when they're very young about what to do in case of emergencies. If there's a fire, where are we going to meet outside? If there's an accident, call 911. But we don't always talk to our adolescents or our children about how to manage stress, or even what situations they consider to be stressful, because what they feel is stressful may be different than what you feel is stressful, and likely is. These two links on the slide offer resources to create a stress management plan. They walk you through what to consider. For instance, what are your stressors? What do you find helpful when you're trying to calm down in the face of stressors? And how do you even recognize those physical feelings in your body when you are under stress? Take instant vacations. Find activities that provide peace and stillness in your mind, and encourage your adolescent to do the same. For instance, we often talk about deep breathing. It's important to practice this when we aren't under stress, so that when those moments arise, deep breathing isn't something that's foreign to us. It's an accessible activity that we know how to do. Pick a theme song. Have your adolescents pick a song that makes them smile or feel good when they hear it. And then when they're stressed or down or upset, have them listen to it. It sounds incredibly silly, but it works. Watching silly videos on YouTube that make us laugh. My personal favorite is Dogs in Boots. But the act of smiling and laughing tricks our brains into releasing all of these happy chemicals, and it makes us believe that we're truly happy and instantly decreases stress levels. De-stressing does not have to be a long involved yoga class. There are really quick ways to de-stress that are easily accessible just about anywhere. And finally, be the model. A good friend of mine says spotted dogs give birth to spotted pups. Our kids are watching us all the time. They're taking in how we react to situations, even when we think they aren't. And how we manage stress and react to difficult situations becomes how they react. Now, don't let this scare you. We aren't perfect, and kids don't want us to be perfect. Perfect parents are really hard to live up to. We will absolutely make mistakes on this journey. We will react poorly to situations. But the important part is not to be afraid to look at our kids and say, hey, I really screwed that one up. Next time, I'll try to do better. And then explain how we'll try to do better. Kids want parents who aren't afraid to admit that they're human and make mistakes. Model positive ways to handle the aftermath of a mistake because that is such an important life skill. And frankly, as a parent, the more human you appear to your kid, the more approachable you will be.
Thank you, Carrie, for that great introduction of the teenage brain and explanation of brain development. So the main purpose of my section of the presentation is to dive a little bit deeper into how drugs impact the teenage brain specifically. So before we get into that, though, I want to briefly talk about why I have this quote up here that 90% of Americans with a substance use disorder began using substances before the age of 18. I start pretty much every single one of my presentations with this quote because the main reason is I want people to understand that substance use before the age of 18 can be absolutely detrimental to brain development, but then also the course of someone's life. So we're going to talk a little bit about brain cells. So our brains are made up of billions of brain cells, which are also called neurons. So during this presentation, I might refer to brain cells or I might refer to neurons. They're the same thing. So all of these billions of brain cells are kind of wired together. And so although this wiring and development of the brain is happening at a very teeny tiny microscopic chemical level, our experiences shape how our brains wire and develop. So I want you to have a very basic understanding of neurotransmitters because that is how drugs act on the brain. So drugs are taken into the body in whichever way, smoked, snorted, put on the tongue, and they're broken down into microscopic molecules that communicate with receptors in our brain. The problem is they communicate very badly and they mess up the messages that should be happening. So drugs, in essence, mimic naturally occurring neurotransmitters. They look similar enough that the receptor says, oh, okay, and it lets it attach and it messes up the messaging. So all drugs of abuse act on the reward system of the brain, and the reward system is fully developed in teenagers. So the reward system is a really amazing part of our brain that tells us that something is good for us and we should keep doing that thing. So whenever we do something that's good for us or the brain senses as something that's necessary for survival, it releases dopamine. So you may have heard of dopamine as the feel-good chemical, and it really is this, this chemical in our brain that helps us feel pleasure. And so some examples of things that release dopamine in the brain are food, sex, spending time with friends, spending time with family. Drugs also cause a release of dopamine. So what I want you to think about when we're thinking about the reward system, imagine that the reward system is like the gas pedal of a car and the prefrontal cortex is the brakes of the car. So essentially, your child is driving a car with a fully functioning gas pedal and a semi-functioning brake system because their prefrontal cortex has not fully developed yet, right? So, on top of that, their brain is wired for risk taking during adolescence, which risk taking usually has a negative connotation. It can be positive. So, that is the part of them that might take a risk and get them to try out for the basketball team when they've never played basketball in their lives, or to try out for drama when they've never acted ever, or to get up and sing in chorus. So it can get students, people to take risks in really positive ways, but then it can also get them to take risks in negative ways. So as parents, we really have to be active in helping our children understand the real consequences of actions, and also to help regulate their emotions and manage their feelings and things like that. Because dopamine has this powerful effect to create this feeling of calm and control in teenagers, which a lot of times I think they often feel out of control because they're still a kid, right? But they're longing for this, feeling of control, and drugs can do that for them. But they can find that feeling of calm and control in other ways, in much more positive and beneficial ways. So really briefly, want to talk about the process of addiction, because honestly, if you understand the process of addiction, then you can understand why any addictive drug is a problem. And the majority of us are impacted by addiction in some way. It may not be that we ourselves are addicted, but it could be that we had a parent or a sibling or a coworker or a friend who was addicted to something, and that has impacted us pretty significantly. So my tip to y'all is really do not shy away from talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol. I think we often get worried that it's going to put ideas in their head, and you talking with them about it is not going to put the ideas in their head. It might already be there because their peers might be talking about it, or they've seen something on TV, who knows. But that really is an opportunity for you to clarify your values around substance use, because the youth survey has shown year after year that children of parents who communicate that drug and alcohol use is wrong are less likely to use. They do listen. So now I'm going to show you a video that we often show all of our students. And so maybe your student has seen this, maybe they haven't. If they haven't, I strongly recommend that you get on YouTube and Google Nugget video, and this one will come up, and it will provide a wonderful shared experience for y'all to discuss addiction. That video basically does a really good job of showing you the different stages of addiction. So this is a more formal way of viewing the stages of addiction. I often ask students, why do you think the bird tried it for the first time? And many students tell me because they think he was curious or he was bored. And I think that's true of many people. So the drug is around and people seem to be having fun using it. So naturally you get curious. Like, what is this weed all about? What is this, alcohol all about? And so if people have a good time, then they do it again and they discover that maybe it makes them feel better about something. And so then it continues to the adaptive level. So they make a decision that they want to feel good. Eventually, though, the brain is like, whoa, I can't handle this. And it begins to change, and they'll develop what's called tolerance. And so tolerance really starts in this dependence stage. And that is where the brain and the body are really becoming dependent on the substance in order to feel good. So no longer does playing football or singing in chorus do it for that person. That's not what makes them feel happy. But they need chorus and alcohol, or football and weed. And you can really see this bird, he is no longer controlled by himself. He's really more controlled by that nugget. So this last stage, or the deteriorative stage, this is often what people think of when they think of addiction. So this really is late stage addiction. People don't think of addiction as a process. And I think students can't really connect with the idea of becoming addicted because what they think of is someone in late stage addiction. They don't think about where did that person, like when did they have their first drink? How did they get to that point where they needed a substance, a drug, alcohol, whatever, in order to feel normal and feel okay? So really getting your student to understand that addiction is a process and it starts with the first drink, and you don't know what is going to make you cross the line into addiction. There's so many things that determine whether or not somebody crosses the line into addiction. I mean, their genes, their environment, who their peers are, their sense of self-worth, trauma. There are so many things that can impact whether or not someone becomes addicted to a substance. So one thing is for sure, the younger someone starts, the more likely they are to become addicted. So remember that quote that we first started with. Okay, so now we're going to dive into what is actually happening in the brain. Start here with the forebrain, or the prefrontal cortex area. So I focus primarily on alcohol and marijuana because those are two of the most used substances by teenagers. So alcohol has a larger effect on the brain than people often imagine or think. So alcohol really can affect the size of the brain, and it can cause what's called brain shrinkage. Alcohol literally will kill brain cells. So I think a lot of students have been, people have tried to scare them in the past by saying that marijuana kills brain cells. Well, alcohol actually does. And so students who are binge drinking, that's extremely dangerous because it's going to start with the first, it's going to start with the prefrontal cortex area and start to shut that down. And then it's going to slowly work its way back. And it's eventually going to get to that, the brainstem area that Carrie was talking about that controls vital life functions, and it will shut down vital life functions. And so what's especially scary about that is that teens do not respond to alcohol in the same way that adults do. They don't get sleepy the way that we do. They actually get a little bit more hyped up. So it's harder for them to realize when they've had too much to drink. A lot of adults, they'll just like go to sleep. But a kid will still be up and moving around, but their brain is not functioning the way that it needs to. And then if they pass out, they're a really scary high risk for alcohol poisoning. I'll be talking about marijuana and THC, but THC is the part of the marijuana plant that causes the high. And it is really good at attaching to the receptors in the brain. And so it messes up the development of neural pathways. It messes up the messages that are supposed to be sent that would help people recognize when they're making errors. And something that I really, really want to point out is that especially these high content THC concentrates, people are more likely to develop psychosis because of use. So we've had kids go into the emergency room with panic attacks and having psychotic episodes because of the high levels of THC. A lot of them call it greening out. So marijuana also can damage the white matter that Carrie was talking about that makes the brain so much faster, and it can reduce gray matter. So that's a major issue. If it's damaging white matter that's just being built or created in the brain, it's a really big problem. Okay, so let's look at the amygdala and the hypothalamus. So this is in that limbic area that Carrie was talking about. So marijuana overstimulates the amygdala. And so what that really means is that it's going to take more stimulation in order to get the brain interested in learning something new. And this made so much sense to me when I learned about it, because I've had kids in my office who used marijuana a lot. And it was like I could be singing and dancing and they were not paying attention hardly to anything that was going on, or maybe not paying attention, but they were like zoned out. So cocaine and amphetamines, those are stimulants, and what they do is they mimic the fight or flight response. So the body thinks that they are in a state of emergency, or it's sending those signals. So that will drastically increase the heart rate and increase breathing and increase temperature. So oftentimes that's how somebody dies from cocaine use or amphetamine use, is because their vital life functions are going absolutely crazy. So I love this picture right here because this shows all the different areas of the brain that there are cannabinoid receptors or THC receptors. You can see that there are a ton in this area, and so we'll go back and talk about that. But there's a ton in the prefrontal cortex, a lot over here in the cerebellum, but there's not really many in the brainstem, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to talk about the hippocampus specifically because the hippocampus is so important during adolescence. Basically, the hippocampus is on fire for learning during adolescence. So what THC does is it suppresses the activity of the hippocampus and makes it more difficult for the brain to acquire and hold on to new memories. So this is the time in their life when they're supposed to be making memories and learning, and it's suppressing that activity. So this is one of the reasons why when teenagers tell me that marijuana is safe, I try to get them to understand this part, that if they want to be able to learn and have the life that they want, marijuana is not going to help them do that. So alcohol also greatly impacts this area. So the hippocampus is a really special part of the brain because it continues to make brain cells. There aren't a lot of parts of the brain that actually do that, but the hippocampus is one. And so alcohol will kill neurons in the hippocampus, which as I've just said, we need for memory and learning. But what's really scary is that it will also prevent the production of new hippocampal cells, so thereby adding to more issues with memory and learning. So that makes sense that someone who has earlier and longer history of abuse is going to have a smaller hippocampus. All right, so we're going to move on to the cerebellum and the brainstem area. So, like I said, like I was pointing out, there aren't a lot of cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem, and that is why it's almost impossible to overdose on marijuana. So a lot of students think that that makes marijuana safe, but there are so many other issues with smoking marijuana that I don't want them to fixate on just that, but that is the reason for it. That's the reason why people typically can't like die from marijuana use. Now, opioids are another, or prescription drugs, heroin, are another animal altogether. They greatly impact the function of the brainstem. And so the main area that it impacts is breathing. It also impacts heart rate. But basically, someone who has an opioid overdose has taken so much into the body that the brain says, oh, we need to slow down breathing. It slows it down and slows it down until it gets to the point where the chest just doesn't rise and fall anymore, and they completely stop breathing. So thankfully, we have Narcan, which has helped save many, many lives and bring people back from overdoses. But unfortunately, there are some really strong opioids out there that Narcan, there has to be multiple doses used. So it's still pretty scary, even with Narcan out there. So inhalants are often one of the first substances used by adolescents, and those have a severe impact on the cerebellum. I mentioned it earlier, alcohol suppresses vital life functions, including breathing and heart rate. I just really want to stress that experiences shape the brain. So all of these different things are going to shape the brain. Drug use, of course, that's going to change the brain. But I also want you to know that all of these other experiences, like love and going to therapy and being involved in the community and having supportive friends and good role models, those also will change the brain. So as parents, we can really focus on increasing those positive experiences to help our kids, because there's going to be times when, you know, bad things are going to happen and we can't help that. But by providing them with some of these good experiences, then we'll help them develop resilience. So when you're talking to your teens about drugs, then first, I want you to take a breath. And I want you to make sure that you are in a good place emotionally. Because if you're trying to talk with them when you're all upset, it's not going to go well. So if you're not functioning from your prefrontal cortex, then you need to take a step back and take a breath and wait until you calm down. So your emotion regulation will help them regulate. Also, make sure you're approaching them from a place of love. You love this person. You adore this person. Part of why you're so angry is because you're scared for this person because you love them so much. So remember that you want them to be better and do better. And so you'll have to work together to figure out how you're going to do that. You also might want to talk with your kid, your student, about the why behind their use. Talk to them about what was going on. What were they feeling when they used that? Were they bored? Okay, let's figure out ways to like manage boredom or deal with that. Were they sad? Okay, well, like, why are they sad? We need to figure that out. Do they need something, you know, to help them deal with that? Do they need to meet with a therapist? Do they need, you know, to see their friends more often? What is it? make sure you're talking with them about their brain and emotion regulation. I have really found when kids understand what's going on in their brain and they're able to connect that with how they're feeling in their body, it makes so much more of a difference. Like, they feel like they have some control over themselves, because I've worked with a lot of kids who they're just like, oh, I just explode and I just, get mad and I just want to hit somebody and I just want to scream and yell. But if you can bring it to, okay, so like, what were you feeling before that happened? What was the thing that led up to that? How did you feel in your chest? Did you ball up your fists? Did you get hot? And they start to pay attention to those different things. And so you can help them build resilience. Like I was saying a minute ago, by providing them with those positive experiences, it's going to help them build the skills they need to be resilient individuals, because you can't stop the bad things from happening, but you can help them deal with it and recover from it.
Okay, so earlier in the session, you've learned about the teenage brain and how drugs impact the teenage brain. Now we are going to be talking about teen drug trends and how to identify drug paraphernalia and drug culture. In front of you, you see a teenager's virtual bedroom, right? And within this room, there are 12, potentially 13 items of concern that are either drug paraphernalia or they demonstrate some type of drug culture. So we are going to be looking around this room and identifying those things so that you have an idea of what to look out for. So what we're first going to start with is Girl Scout cookies. Everybody loves Girl Scout cookies. Seems pretty innocuous as a sweatshirt, right? Girl Scout cookies is actually a popular strain of cannabis or marijuana, okay? Other popular strains are Pineapple Express, Blue Dream, Purple Haze, Sour Diesel. All right, so if you hear any of these names pop up, they are talking about specific types of cannabis or marijuana, also known as THC, right? So other names that cannabis goes by is weed, grass, 420, bud, hash, and skunk. All right, so if you hear any of those names, that is a definite indicator that they may be using. Any type of 420, it could be on any type of clothing materials, sweatshirts, hoodies, socks, things like that. Also marijuana leaf. Nobody is going to have a marijuana leaf on any of their clothing or anywhere on display unless they are actively using marijuana. So just wanted to point out the marijuana socks here that say 420 on them, as well as the Sour Diesel poster. Again, those are the different types of strains of marijuana. I also wanted to point out here is a homemade bong. So homemade bongs are typically made out of cans or empty water bottles or things of that nature. Anything that can be hollowed out can be used as a homemade bong. Something else that can be used to smoke marijuana is aluminum foil. They can fashion it into a little pipe so that they can smoke it out of. So since we just talked about marijuana, we are going to talk about 710. So 710, upside down, you see it's oil, right? So that refers to THC concentrates. They're also called dabs, wax, honey oil, butter, and oil. Okay, dabs is probably the most common phrase that we hear about it right now. You see, it is a marijuana concentrate that is more of a waxy or butter-like substance, right? So some of the things that go along with this, the dabs are a small torch. They use this to heat up their concentrates to really high temperatures in order to smoke them, okay? And something else right here, this is called a nectar collector. So that is used to collect and to smoke the THC concentrates, okay? So just wanted to point out here, this is also a nectar collector. You see they can be bright colors and different styles and things like that. So moving along, where's Molly? Okay, you see the hat along with the pacifier. So Molly is actually a code name for ecstasy. It can also be called rolls. So if you hear somebody say, I was rolling pretty hard last night, they don't mean they were laughing on the floor, right? They mean that they were tripping off of ecstasy. So some things that go along with ecstasy are Vicks Vapor Rub. They rub it on the chest, and that enhances the high and makes it last a little bit longer and makes them a little bit higher, okay? Also, pacifiers and lollipops. So whenever somebody is taking ecstasy, they tend to clench or grind their teeth. So the pacifiers or the lollipops are meant to stop that grinding from happening, to save their jaw from hurting later, as well as to stop hurting their teeth. Okay, so moving along, we have this cup. It is a styrofoam cup with purple liquid in it. This is indicative of purple drink or scissor, okay? It is also called lean. You might have heard about it. There have been songs. It's really popular in pop culture. It's most often drank in a white styrofoam cup. I'm not sure exactly why, but that's part of the pop appeal to it. So what is it? It is made with prescription cough syrup, usually containing codeine, and it is mixed with hard candy and soda. So you have that cough syrup, which is getting you high and making it taste good by adding all of that extra stuff. It could be also over-the-counter cough syrup if prescription cough syrup is not available. So they're using 5 times the amount of a normal dose of cough syrup to get that high from it, okay? So just wanted to point out we have the Sprite here also, as well as the Jolly Ranchers. So this thing right here, it looks like a USB port or something, innocuous like that. This is actually a vape device. So vape devices often look like any other type of everyday thing that you use. You see this picture right here. It has all types of things that could be poured out of a backpack, right? So this is actually a vape device. It is a Soren, as well as this one. And you notice it looks just like the water enhancement drops, right, that everybody uses to put their flavorings in their water. This one right here, it looks like a USB port, but it is actually a vape device. So it's important to know what these look like so that you can identify them if you come across them in your teenager's room. And finally, the last thing in plain sight I wanted to point out is the onion icon. So this is actually an icon for the dark web. Any of these icons can be used as the Internet Explorer type deal for the dark web. So why is that important? Because the dark web is a site for illegal activities, which includes drug trafficking. We are finding kids are able to get on the dark web and they can order drugs to be delivered right to their front door. Okay, so keeping an eye out for any of these icons. It could be on a desktop, it could be on a laptop, it could be on a phone. All they need to do is download some special settings and they can get in it without any problem. So if you're looking around your kids' room, it's always really important to look inside of drawers and stuff, right? So let's take a look. So the first thing that caught my eye are the stoner patch dummies. These are actually marijuana edibles. So what actually kind of clued me in was the word stoner. Stoner is people who smoke a lot of marijuana, right? They're called stoners, as well as the little marijuana leaves on the package. So marijuana edibles can be candy. They can be different kinds of foods, brownies or cookies. They could be individually packaged, very bright colors, and look just like regular foods, right? So it's really important to kind of check out the names or the pictures. And if there's something that doesn't seem quite right, you can always Google the name and it will let you know if it is a regular candy or if it is a marijuana edible. So the second thing in here is kratom. So kratom is actually an herbal painkiller, which when taken in high doses, acts as an opiate in the system. So that means that it is extremely addictive whenever taken in larger doses. All right. So kratom can be sold as powder, as pills, as tea. Pills are most often the ones that we are seeing with teenagers. And finally, nutmeg. So I did not put this in here on accident. This is actually a challenge on TikTok right now. Teens are challenging one another to smoke or drink large amounts of nutmeg, right? So they're drinking it with large amounts of water. We're finding that like 5 milligrams or more is equivalent to the hallucinogenic high that the same as like psychedelic mushrooms. This is a general medicine cabinet like you might see at home, right? So the first thing that we're going to take a look at that can be misused by teens is the Robitussin. So that is DXM, right? That's one of the ingredients that's in there. In a lower dose, it gives the similar effects to THC. So by lower dose, I mean still more than is suggested recommended use. When taken in higher doses, we're talking probably 5 to 10 times more, it can produce a hallucination and delusions. Okay. So the second thing I want to point out is Benadryl. So Benadryl is another TikTok challenge that is all over the internet. Teens are encouraging others to take as much Benadryl as possible to give themselves a high, and which has been causing overdoses and trips to the hospital. Imodium is something that you might not consider could be potentially worrisome, but it is, because in large doses it also acts as an opioid, which again is extremely, extremely addictive, right? So we're finding that 50 or more pills a day is equivalent to the high of heroin. Another thing to look out for is prescription medications. So some of the most commonly abused prescriptions are opioids, which are your codeine, morphine, Vicodin, Percocet, those painkillers that we have after a significant injury or surgery or something like that. Again, these are highly addictive. Another prescription that's commonly abused is a benzodiazepine, also known as benzos. So these could be prescriptions such as sedatives, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications such as Xanax. Okay. So keeping an eye out for any prescription medications is really important. So now we're going to talk about signs of potential drug use in your teenager, okay? So my disclaimer here is that just because you see one or more of these signs doesn't necessarily mean that your child is using, but if you're seeing multiple of these signs or symptoms together, it could be a good indicator, okay? Something to definitely look out for and follow up on if you have any concerns. Okay, clenching teeth, we already kind of talked about that. Frequent bloody or runny noses, drowsiness, confusion, dilated pupils, talking quickly or incoherently, bloodshot eyes, mood swings. Again, teenagers have mood swings commonly sometimes, right? So, but whenever paired with some of these other things, it could be a cause for concern. Slurred speech, loss of appetite, slowed breathing patterns. So any type of depressant, any like alcohol or opioids, things like that, causes your breathing to slow down. Rapid changes in weight. And probably the biggest sign to look out for of potential drug use is poor personal hygiene. So if you have somebody who is usually really into their appearance and usually takes really good care of themselves, takes showers and brushes their hair and brushes their teeth, and all of a sudden they stop doing those things. They stop taking showers. They stop, putting on deodorant and trying to look decent, and they stop taking care of themselves. That is a sign that something is wrong. It could be drugs, it could be a mental health issue, it could be anything going on in their personal lives, but poor personal hygiene is definitely one of those things, even on its own, that needs to be looked at. So now we're going to discuss some prevention strategies that you as parents can do to kind of help prevent drug use in your kid, okay? So monitoring the use of prescription medications. Say somebody is injured or has a surgery or something else like that, just kind of monitoring to make sure that the prescription is being taken as prescribed by the doctor, right? Making sure that they are taking one pill at a time, and making sure that the person who it is prescribed to is the one that is using it. I know that we think that teenagers should be able to, give out their or take their own medication and should be responsible for things like that. But whenever you're talking about like opioids or benzos, it would be really important to kind of monitor that use. Okay. Second, lock up prescriptions, other commonly abused substances, and alcohol. So locking it up, we just mean take away accessibility, right? You can actually use a lockbox. So if you reach out to your substance abuse prevention specialist for your school, they can provide you with a lockbox that has a combination lock on it. And you can put prescriptions or other substances in there if you're concerned that your child might abuse it. Okay, if you do not have a lockbox, that's okay. Removing accessibility is the key here. So if the medications are usually in the bathroom that everybody in the family uses, remove those from the bathroom. Put them in your room, put them in your bathroom. Just take away the accessibility to it. Move it to somewhere where they have to ask for it in order to use it, rather than just having it available for use for anybody. That also goes for alcohol too. Okay, so, removing it, keeping it locked up, or keeping it where it is not accessible to the teenagers in your home. So one of the biggest prevention strategies that we can probably use is providing parental supervision. Okay, so what that looks like is knowing where your kids are, knowing when they're coming home, knowing who they're with. Knowing their friends is really important, because if their friends use drugs, they are going to be more likely at some point or another to also use drugs, right? Because they want to go along with their friend. Parental supervision can also look like looking around your teenager's room, looking through their phones. I know that, everybody wants privacy, right? But our teenagers don't really deserve the same type of privacy that we do as an adult, right? We are in charge of them. We have to make sure that they are safe. And if we need to look through their belongings to do that, that's okay. So the next strategy is talk to your child about drugs. I know that this can be a really difficult conversation to have with your child, but it is so important to talk to them about drugs, because in your talk you can tell them about your expectations regarding them not using drugs or alcohol. You can tell them about, what the effects and the impacts are on their bodies regarding drugs and alcohol. You can talk to them about the family's history. You may have a family history of addiction or something, and that's also important for them to know. Because when it comes down to it, if your child knows that you do not approve of them using drugs or alcohol, they are less likely to use drugs or alcohol. Okay, again, I know it's a hard discussion to have, but if you reach out to your substance abuse prevention specialist at your school, I'm sure they would be more than happy to help you have that discussion, or help coach you through what that discussion looks like and help you practice. The next strategy is to get teens involved with sports, activities, or clubs. So this is really important, because sometimes drug use comes from not feeling like they belong, right? So getting them involved with sports or things that they enjoy doing, it gives them a sense of belonging, and gives them a group of peers with similar interests, right? And if they're doing activities, then that also reduces their time, their free time, to get into other things. With children in sports, having that discussion with them about, if you use drugs or alcohol, you may not be able to play this sport. The next one is be a positive role model. So as parents, we are our child's very first teachers in life, right? So they look to us to know how to behave in certain situations. They look to us for guidance and for learning about the world around them, right? And so they're going to learn by seeing us and how we behave. And the final prevention strategy is to seek treatment, right? For trauma, grief, family addiction, any mental health concerns. So this is extremely important. If you are noticing that your child is having difficulty, whether it is adjusting to, school life, whether it is some type of grief because of a significant loss, any mental health concerns, all of these things, it's really important to find help. Right? So treatment could look like going to an outpatient therapist, seeing somebody once a week to talk about like what's going on. They also offer online counseling now. It can also look like seeking help through the school. So again, talking to your substance abuse prevention specialist, they can talk to your child about about what's going on, especially if you have suspicions of them using drugs or alcohol. If it is any kind of mental health issues or any other issues, they can talk to the school social worker, school psychologists, school counselors. All of those professionals are here and ready to help. Okay? So just remember, substance abuse is often a symptom, right? It's often a response to overwhelming feelings or boredom or not belonging. Usually it is not the problem. Usually it is due to a bigger problem that needs to be addressed. Okay, and as parents, the best thing that you can do is keep those lines of communication open so that they feel like they can go to you with anything, with any kind of these difficult discussions. If they feel like they can go to you and they're building that connection with you, they are also less likely to use drugs or alcohol. Thank you for attending our presentation today. We would appreciate if you fill out our quick 5-question survey so that we know how to improve our future presentations. Our contact information is provided on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to any of us for questions about the information in the presentation today. If you have questions about the Substance Abuse Prevention Program, please feel free to contact the Office of Student Safety and Wellness for Fairfax County Public Schools. The information is provided below. Thank you and have a nice day.